what happens if your mic's closer to you?
Sound good?
It actually sounds a lot cleaner.
It looks hilarious to see it just kind of like walk into the screen.
I know, it's like So episode 10, is that what this is?
Hey guys, welcome back to the Dog Trainers Podcast. This is episode 10, and we've got our very special guest here, our good friend Corey. How you doing, Corey?
I'm well. How are you guys?
Good, man. You sound real sexy on the microphone there. So
yeah.
With what's all going on, he's already derailing it.
Start over.
It's funny. It's fine. All right, here we go.
Welcome to the Dog Trainers Podcast, a podcast created by dog trainers for dog trainers or anyone who's ever fallen in love with man's best friend.
Episode 10, Why Dog Training is Important. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Dog Trainers Podcast. This is episode 10. I'm Mariano, that's Brent, and we've got our good friend Corey with us as a special guest. How you doing, bud?
I'm well. How are you guys?
Good. Still sounding sexy. I don't know what it is. But today, we're going to be discussing something that's been a very prominent topic since, there are lots of good people out there who understand this need with the whole virus and, rescues and shelters being shut down. And a lot of people are considering rescuing or fostering dogs. And while that's great, and we definitely encourage people to do it, there are certain things that we want you guys to be aware of and look out for. So where do we begin?
Cool. I guess a couple things that I really want to make relevant for people as dog trainers, we get very similar calls all the time, and we're so happy to have our special guest Corey Chavez on because he'll be able to give us his take on the rescue game, on rescue dogs, on all these things. But what we start seeing with this COVID-19 lockdown, our dogs are having so much FaceTime with us now. That my biggest fear, my biggest worry is how are the dogs going to be when life goes back to normal, right? Or goes back to that new normal. So many times with rescue dogs, we see separation anxiety, we see overprotection, we see codependency, we see isolation distress, and we see dogs who at a very young age may or may not have, had a loving family. So sometimes when people are rescuing or fostering for the first time and giving these dogs the attention that they require and that they need, is sometimes the dogs, what I like to say is they fall in love. Right? And when they fall in love, it's puppy love, right? To its fullest. And if you guys remember having puppy love, is very emotional, very strong. But not necessarily always the healthiest, at least in my perspective.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, Corey, you want to your first time on the podcast, you want to tell people a little bit about yourself?
Sure. My name's Corey. I've been training dogs for about 10 years now. Brent and I have known each other pretty much that entire time, 10 years.
Very good friends. Friends.
Yeah, we used to train at the same facility. So yeah, we've gone down the same path, similar paths.
Mm-hmm.
And then we branched off a little while ago, a few years ago. And we, just like him and Mariano, kind of started our own businesses. And so now I'm going into, my third year, my own business and working with a lot of rescues now. Most of my dogs, I would say 80% of the dogs I work with are rescue dogs. So yes, I have a lot of experience now with that. But so anyways, I spent, 7 years learning and working alongside you and our mentors and learning to train dogs at the facility. I know you guys have brought that up already in one of your episodes where you guys came from. So yeah, I was there at Canines Only with you. Backtrack a little. I had to learn how to train my own dog when I was 18 years old, kind of that same, right? Everybody's kind of the same when it comes to, I became a dog trainer because I needed to train my own dog. Same thing.
Yeah,
same thing.
Cool.
Well, I didn't really follow that. I really needed a job when I moved to LA and I had my dog and I had been down the PetSmart,
but it's one of those byproducts. It's like one of those byproducts of just, I happen to have a dog and I'm working with dogs,
right,
and we had the mentors to do it. That was great.
Right. Yeah. So just sparked an interest and wanted to continue with it and dove in deep. And as you know, we've dove in deep with it and developed our own understandings and some good skill with dogs. And then now just trying to give that out and educate people and work with them as much as we can and dogs. And that's where I find myself right now is just trying to give as much value as I can to people with, my expertise and my knowledge that I've gained over the course of this time. And it's ever evolving, right? It's ever evolving. We're continuing. Every dog is new. Every owner is new. Every person. So continuing to stack on the experience and then deliver that now. So now I work with a lot of rescue dogs and I guess just every other dog in between, puppy or somebody got the dog from a breeder as well. So so that's, I guess, where I'm at right now. And we're kind of all experiencing this Corona thing right now. And I agree with you when you're talking about a lot of anxiety is going to happen or develop right now. Every time I'm talking to somebody, I'm mentioning those same things right now. That I'm a little scared that when this is sort of over, we're going to be called with a lot of anxiety issues, right? So pretty much everybody I talk to at this point, I'm telling them, oh, you're going to want to do this, or I recommend this, mostly just because and that's if they bring up anxiety or not. I'm just foreseeing that to happen based on experience, and whether they bring it up or not. Right.
Right. It's kind of inevitable. We can kind of see that's what's going to happen.
It's funny how that goes, because right as we started talking about that, whenever it was that we originally kind of brought up this like as an idea, I started getting those questions too, and it's like, oh, my dog's doing great with all the stuff we've been working on, but I notice this, and it's like, oh, well, you're home. Make sure that you're, it's okay to ask for space from your dog. Let me ask you guys this though. When it comes to rescue dogs in particular, do you ever notice, I notice sometimes that there are clients who kind of like create a backstory for a dog. They'll adopt the dog or foster the dog, and we don't really know much about it. And they're like, I think he was abused because if I like put him in his crate, he freaks out. Or if my husband comes home, he freaks out.
Almost every time.
Yeah.
Almost every time. Yeah. Very common. Very common for people to justify why the dog is behaving a certain way. Right. It's always a justification.
And that's a good way to put it.
But I understand why, because they're trying to figure it out.
Yeah.
Right. It's not, and most of the time it's just because they don't understand maybe dogs at a deeper level. Right. Yeah. So I empathize and understand why they do that. So I think that's where, it's our job to sort of come in and say, well, we understand these things are happening, but they may not be happening for the reason that you're thinking. And they're probably not happening for the reason that you're thinking, because everyone just jumps straight to the worst case scenario.
The catastrophe. Yeah.
Right. And those things do happen. We do get dogs from those situations, right? Absolutely.
Breeders, hoarders, fighting rinks. Like, we get dogs from all different, walks of life. However, I am a strong believer, that dogs aren't so much physically abused as they are mentally neglected, right? Their emotional needs, their physical needs, their developmental needs get neglected, right? And a lot of times, when people, I think this isn't a funny subject, but you guys can kind of relate to it. It's like when people say, oh, I just rescued a dog. And I go, oh, really? How old is the dog? They go, 8 weeks old. And I go, okay. So, okay, you rescued a puppy. Great. And then that puppy 2 weeks later is acting shy or weird. And they go, I think the dog was beaten. And in my mind, I'm thinking of this world where, I don't get me wrong, I know it exists out there because everything exists, but I'm thinking of this world where there's these, this really scary world where there's these really sweet puppies and people are beating them. Like, I don't see that realistically in my head, right? As a possibility. Like, no one sees a puppy and wants to immediately punch that thing in their face. So in my mind, it's like this idea that small puppies get abused when they're in a very infant stage. It doesn't really happen. However, I do see adolescent dogs, a little bit older dogs, when they're in their nippy and bitey phases. Yeah, these dogs get flung around and bopped and hit and scolded for like super unfair reasons. But anyways, just my little tangent, just to be clear on really, really young infant puppies usually are not abused. However, they are neglected. And sometimes they may not have the proper handling or human socialization that they need at a young age. And we see the results of that all the time as dog trainers.
Yeah, a funny way in which that I noticed the neglect and how it kind of manifests itself into issues is people who get a young puppy, whether or not they believe that the dog was abused, they tend to do this thing to where everybody understands why it's important to socialize your dog. what they don't seem to understand, though, is that doesn't mean every single person who wants to like pick them up and carry them and hug them should be allowed to, because sometimes it can be too much for the dog, you know, and so that ends up being a negative thing where it was meant to be like a positive, you know, in order to teach the dog to be comfortable around people, bikes, whatever the case. So I spend a lot of time talking to people when they have younger puppies, and I tell them, you know, a great thing to do is socialization is key 100%, but socialization with a certain, you know, context to it. You don't just like throw your dog into the hands of every like giant person who wants to play with them. If the dog seems interested, I don't see a problem with it, but sometimes they're just not feeling it. You can see that in a puppy, but because they're puppies, they don't really, it's not obvious. It's not like they're going to like growl, you know, they're just kind of like, oh crap, I'm in this guy's arms again. And just, you know, and then everybody has that same story, like a month down the line when the dog's a bit older, it's like, I don't get it. We socialized him. He was great. Then all of a sudden he started growling, you know, it just out of nowhere.
It's like over socialization almost.
Right.
You know? Yeah. Yeah.
Well, that's going to come with age, right? That's going to come. So sure, your puppy's going to love everybody, and then it's going to get a little bit older, and yeah, you know, hormones are going to kick in. And I mean, obviously, yeah, we're talking, I don't know, a 6, 7, 8 month old puppy, right? So yeah, not 8 weeks old or 3 months old or 4 months old. But I do think that, well, even my own understanding, my own definition of socialization is sure. I think you can desensitize. So maybe when your puppy's young, yeah, sure, it's going to be held and people are going to hold it. You're going to take it out. It's going to experience those things. But then later, when you start getting to that the growling phase that you're talking about, well, that's no longer with my definition of socialization. That's more learning how to behave.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's exactly how I explain that. So when people, especially with the rescue dogs, they say, oh, we don't know how to socialize them around other dogs, or we don't know how to socialize them around the things that, you know, he's insecure with or whatever. I don't know, cars or skateboards, whatever.
Right.
And I'm saying, well, it's not really a social, you're not trying to get them to develop relationship with these things. You're just trying to get them to understand that these things aren't bad.
Right.
So, but that's going to be contingent on what state of mind is your dog in. So if we're talking about an 8-week-old puppy, well, you really don't have much control over that. I mean, yeah, it's going to be an 8-week-old puppy. So therefore it's just desensitizing. Right. But once the dog is older and now you can actually, well, hopefully this is what we teach, is how to have control over dog's state of mind. Well, now you can show that dog how to behave in social setting. And that, to me, is what socialization is about. So it may mean meet people. It may mean meet dogs as a portion of it. But the greater understanding should be that it's for them to learn how to behave in a social setting, social environment.
Right.
Right. And that and the only way that happens is, I think, well, properly, is with strong relationship. So you get this new rescue dog and people want to right away just take that dog out. And they're not ready for that yet. No. And the dogs end up failing, right? They fail. So that's what I see a lot mostly with rescue dogs, is that they get those dogs, and then going back to them, the adopter, the new owner, whatever you want to call them, they're justifying taking the dog out because they think that that's what was lacking in its previous life, right? So now they want to jump straight to that, appeasing that fulfillment of, oh, well, you didn't have this before, so I want you to be able to go to the dog park and have all this freedom, and they're just not ready for all of that yet. So, you know, when we're talking about rescue dogs, like that's one of the biggest things that I've seen, or the most common thing I see, is that put dog in situation that's not ready for that yet. And the owner isn't ready for it either. They don't know how to handle it.
Right. That's true. And sometimes. Go ahead. Sorry. No. Sorry. Go ahead.
And so what ends up happening is then these experiences just keep stacking on top of each other. And then what I think happens, though, is that now the dog loses even more trust. Right. Because, I was a little insecure with this in the first place, and then you forced me to be in this, and now I don't really trust you, and I don't really trust the situation, and this is bad as a whole. Right. And so it just it's a revolving circle, and then the dog ends up getting worse. Right.
Yeah, because it ends up being kind of this like an affirmation of what the dog might have been
already thought. I'm scared of the world, and you just confirmed it.
Right. And you were right. Like, the world sucks, and now I have proof, and so I'm gonna, I'm gonna protect myself, which makes total sense. But yeah, I completely agree. I think a big thing with socializing a dog, especially a younger dog, is, I tell people too all the time that socialization, I think, is best when it goes hand in hand with obedience, because even when you're socializing, like what I was talking about was like when people kind of are overbearing to a dog, because if a person's like giant and a puppy's typically small, there's this scary look of like, when you're giant picking up this little puppy. So there is that moment of like, whoa, whereas there's so much like power in letting the dog, like if the dog wants to go and play, then that's one thing,
Yeah.
But in terms of like avoiding overhandling the dog, what I tell people is start working your obedience. I understand he's a puppy. He's not going to be great, but if you could do the most basic of stuff, you take him to Starbucks and somebody's like, oh my God, your dog's so cute. Can I pet him? Sure. Hang on one sec. Sit. Good. Release. And then now he has this person as a reward. So they're not that scary person invading his space. They're the thing he can earn if he's good. And you try to set up context for people to be good things. And then when the dog gets older, like you were talking about, then of course you have the more realistic, like long-term ideal of, listen, I'm glad you like people, or at the very least, you're not like weary of people, but not everybody necessarily needs to be your friend because we got to go. I just need you to kind of heal and pay attention. And if the time is right, sure. I mean, there's definitely context like dog parks or daycares where you can socialize your dog or go to friends' houses and socialize with people, but it's not necessarily always appropriate. You don't shake hands with everybody you see on the street. I think that's something that you told me, Brent.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's true. I really like hearing your guys' opinions because it's like, I know we come from a similar background, but then many years we've been separated.
Yeah, but we're all different.
Yeah, we're all different, but it's crazy how three people who think differently, who our goal is the same. We want to help as many dogs as we want, but we can all come together and have, we're preaching the good word of dog training, which is great. My definition of socialization has always had three parts to it, right? And the first part is exposure, right? So that's kind of where desensitization happens, right? And we know as dog trainers, and those people who are listening, young dog trainers or dog lovers, there are windows that close in puppyhood for certain exposures, right? So, if a dog under the age of 18 weeks is not socialized heavily with other dogs and humans, the likelihood of that dog in adulthood showing aversion to men, children, and strangers is a lot higher, right? But if under 18 weeks, we start seeing that those dogs are exposed to the world, to noises, to other dogs, to other people, on a regular basis, that they're actually going to start adjusting and adapting to that environment, right? The second part of socialization to me has always been teaching how to interact, right? Teaching how to interact. So be it interact with a human, if it's biting, do I jump on humans? Do I jump on dogs? Do I bite dogs? Do I chase dogs? Do I grab their legs? Do I grab their necks? How do I do it? Right. So, luckily dogs help each other learn that stuff, especially if you have an older dog with a younger dog, they can kind of coach each other through that. But definitely the hardest part is teaching puppies how to interact with humans. I think that's always the hardest one. Right. And then the third part is context and conduct. Right. So this is where what we're training the dog to be and what we're training the dog to do changes. Right. If I want a house pet, or do I want a working dog, or do I want a service dog, or do I want a therapy dog? The context changes of how the dog should conduct themselves, right? Do I want a dog who is perfectly obedient and constantly deferring to the owner, or do I want a dog with a little personality who's goofy and interacts but just doesn't bite the kids, right? And all of these three things, even though they're very different, but they're also similar because they kind of bleed into each other as the dog gets older. The more we expose the dog, the more we can teach them to interact with things. And the more consistent places and context that we give the dog, the more that they can start generalizing. This is how I have to act, at daycare. This is how I have to act at the dog park. This is how I have to act at grandma's house, right? And we give the dog different contexts. And the dogs, it's so crazy to see how dogs from environment to environment can just learn to switch, their behavior. So it's really cool. So what would you say, Corey, if we were to say like, so what do you feel most rescue dogs that you work with, what do you feel that they suffer from the most?
Patience and self-control. Which I think there's where 90% of our issues stem from lack of patience and self-control. So I don't know. That doesn't really go towards just rescue dog. I think that's dog in general,
right?
But majority of now you're talking about a 5-year-old dog that has zero patience and zero self-control and has been doing behaving that way, acting that way, whatever for X amount of years. So yeah, usually it's a patience and self-control. And then, but if, that's at the top, and then you can now break that down to, it doesn't have, it has zero education,
Right.
That's also a big one too. I'd say so. First one is lack of patience and lack of self-control. And then it has zero education.
Right.
And maybe, level and even with zero education is, lack of socialization, as we're talking about. It hasn't experienced anything. Or if it did, experience in the wrong manner.
Right.
But I think at the top, it's patience and self-control. That's usually what the issue is.
Right. Yeah. How about you, Mariano? What would you say?
I would agree with him. I just wanted to add to it that, the biggest thing that I think rescue dogs tend to suffer from is like their new owners' imaginations. And that's when we start talking about they make up, and again, of course we understand that they are coming from a good place and it's not their fault. That's why we have jobs. It's it's understandable, but it's just so that people are clear. There is this really huge tendency among people. It seems like, how it's basically like everything else. There's a typical like rough kind of type of a person that's willing to like adopt or foster a dog, and they're really sweet, emotional people. So they're kind of bleeding hearts, which means sometimes they like, they feel sad for the dog because he was a rescue, and they just kind of like, logically you want to make sense of what you're feeling. So they just start creating a backstory of like, oh, that's why the dog's sad. Maybe he was abused. Like he's scared of my girlfriend. Maybe a woman beat him. Like, they start just creating these stories. Yeah. But, when they seek out training and then they finally start to get the ball rolling with how to kind of move past this, because it might be true, but it might not be true. It's probably not true, but I guess one never knows for sure. So,
but the funny part is either way, the solution is the same.
It's the same.
I tell people that all the time.
Yeah, but the solution then is a bit harder because now you have to navigate through that.
Right.
It's not only just teaching the dog, but now you've got to navigate and kind of get the owner's mindset correct. There's coaching there. There's a lot of coaching.
I love that. Can I like just in dog training in general, because Corey, like you and I met each other a while back, but we haven't been like quite, because I'm in Arizona, and Brent and Corey are in LA together, and we haven't had like quite as much interaction, and so like I guess my fun thing with dog training as I kind of grew and developed into this, to where we are now, is I've always really enjoyed the human element of it, and really getting people on board. I've always found that I'm just kind of, I've had like a knack for it. And so that's always my favorite part. When somebody has this misunderstanding with the dog, it's kind of this like weird push and pull of like, not pressuring them like in a negative sense, but sort of lighting a little fire under them to be like, hey, look, your dog can get better. And the thing is, there's all these reasons why your dog most likely wasn't abused, but I understand where you're coming from. I'm not coming after you. It's a totally normal. In fact, it's a very sweet thing of you. You're a good owner. You care about your dog. You're looking after them emotionally, and you're considering training, which I get it. It's not cheap. It takes time. It costs money, but you care about the dog. So you're on the right track. I'm just here to help you out. So let's do like this. And then I talk to them pragmatically, like, listen, I understand the past and all that stuff, but from here on out, how about we do it like this? And you'll be amazed with what the dog can do. And then typically speaking, that's at least enough to get owners on board to like, to believe you in good faith to start the work. And then the work starts to speak for itself. And then they're like, oh, like you were right, and then at that point, it's just smooth sailing until the end.
Well, it's you're correct. I agree. It's empathy. It's empathetic. I'm empathetic to them. Right. I understand.
Not sympathetic.
No. Yes. Empathetic. Yes, I understand that. But yes. And then now you're talking about the education portion.
Right.
Yes, I understand that. But this is where we're trying to go.
Right.
And it's also, I think, yes, this is part of education and teaching them, well, if you continue down that route, this is what's going to happen. Right. And so that's why we want to steer the ship this way, because that's where you're trying to go. So and this again, I think is the difference between good dog training and bad dog training is the ability to communicate that to people.
I couldn't agree more.
Without that, I mean, just in general, look, yes, we work with dogs, but this is a human service based business with human, we have nothing. Right. So yes, that
we just have a bunch of dogs running the streets. That's what we have without humans.
Right. So yeah, that's a very important part is learning to connect there. So like, that's connection. And I agree with you that yes, I get a lot out of working with people. Yeah. And that's nice. It's an enjoyable part of working with dogs, of training dogs. And yes, 50% of it is your dog and 50% of it is the owner. So the better you are at navigating and communicating, the better your dog training is going to be. And like you said, eventually, hopefully, I think we're all sort of at that point where, yes, you have enough experience where your experience speaks for
Right.
itself, right?
True.
So now you no longer have to be, I hate to say it, but selling. You no longer have to do that.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah.
Well, I don't think there's anything wrong with it. You're selling a legitimate service. You're helping people with their dogs. I think, but I get what you're saying. Where like it's not so much you're just using
Your
pretty
knowledge
words
speaks
anymore.
for itself.
Yeah, exactly.
You know?
Right. That's a good
It's
place to be.
reputation. It's
Right.
reputation.
Yeah,
Right.
that's awesome. No, that's awesome.
So even your reputation and how you handle client, how you handle person. You can be great at training dog, but you're not great at handling people.
Right.
Which,
Yeah.
remember, I was there. Remember that? I was there.
We know a bunch. I mean, everyone evolves. Everyone evolves. We, those of you guys who are listening, me and Corey grew up in a company with, probably over 10, 15 dog trainers throughout the duration we were there. And not everyone has the ability. All of them were very gifted dog trainers, but not everyone was gifted with the ability to deal with a human. Right. And anybody that I teach to be a dog trainer in my dog training school, it's always, what we notice in the animal industry, the animal industry is filled with a lot of people who prefer animals over other people. Right. You guys ever seen this in rescues? They're like, I work with rescue because if I could, because people suck. Right.
Yeah.
And the big thing that we always have to preach is the key to good dog training is good education and being able to teach people. And, anybody who comes to me who goes, I want to work with dogs professionally because I hate people or I dislike people. I tell them straight up, I say, listen, you're never going to be successful.
You're not going to be successful.
You're not going to be successful. Unless you learn to love people, you will never be a successful dog trainer. There's so many people that we've known, Corey, over the years, and even Mariano's known them, that are really good with dogs, but they couldn't teach a human being to save their lives.
Well, so they can be successful, but they're going to be successful at a number 2 or a number 3 or a number 4. Right. They're not going to be the number 1. So I think there is time and place for that, and you may have to evolve through that, right? You may be a number 3 for years.
Yeah.
As you're developing your people skills and
that's a good point.
Being able to communicate, and eventually you might get there. So not to discourage, right? Any young dog trainer is like, oh, well, there's
definitely keep trying. I can't
do that. Yeah.
Definitely keep trying. That wasn't what I was trying to say, but
the
idea is if you notice that there's the weakness, then I guess to your point, Corey, keep going and don't discourage you and keep going for sure. Yeah.
But in order for that to happen, you need to learn from somebody.
True. Mentors.
Important. I think what we're saying is there's a big difference between being a dog trainer and like running a dog training business, because if you work at like a kennel, I've met a lot of like kind of back of the house, just dog trainers who just train. And there are other people that deal with like the salesmanship or the phone calls and the whole thing and the follow-ups and, people that can just get it done, and they know how to do all the phases and they know how to work all the dogs, and there's nothing wrong with that. So if that's where you are, but I think what, the whole point really of us even starting this podcast when we did was just, it's not like we're perfect and we're learning as we go too. And we're always getting better too. And just because you may be somewhere right now, that doesn't mean you can't grow. There's, like you guys said, there's mentors out there. There's also books and seminars. And I mean, people make entire empires out of this sort of thing of how to teach you to build yourself emotionally and people skill wise, and how to speak to people. And I think that's a fun thing about dog training is there really is no like perfection. You just get better forever until you're done.
Yeah. And there's no limit to growth, There's no limit.
Well, yes. I mean, that's majority of life is there's no perfection and there's no end. There's no end. And at the beginning of the conversation where I said, we're ever evolving.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I'm actively working, doing this, understanding I'm ever evolving. I tell every person I talk to, oh, well, you're a new person. This is a new dog. This is all brand new for me. Yes, I've done this hundreds of times previously, but this is all new for me. So we're in this together. I'm learning just as much as you are. Yeah. And so I think that keeps me balanced, right? Because I'm not trying to, I think we know some dog trainers, or you've been around some that are know-it-alls, and, they bring that bravado, machismo, and it's like, people don't want that. People don't want that. No.
Right.
So I stay very humble. And I think that's because I've also had a lot of mentors and a lot of teachers. And I recognize, oh, whoa, my foundation came from 6, 7 people.
Right.
Yeah.
Obviously, I put the work in. We put the work in.
Right.
But those people helped mold and guide you. And without them, we wouldn't be where we are. And so it's ever evolving. And I think, and this is just the way I am personally, though. I'm trying to be a student, right? I'm a student.
Right.
With anything. And so I'm still a student with this. I think at this point, we have enough knowledge and we have enough experience where we've got the ship going, and we don't need to kind of, it's not that we don't need to, it's just maybe you don't have as much time to sit and look at every new dog trainer that's coming up and try to see what they, can offer you. You're probably seeking out the ones that you've already, built a liking to, and you follow them and you still learn from them. Right. So, but bottom line, ever evolving and trying to constantly learn. So anybody who's out there, don't look at, us and think that, we're so successful and we're not trying to learn. Cause that's, I think, when you're going to fail. The moment that you think you know everything, you're going to fail because someone is going to call you out on your bullshit.
Yeah. Period.
Yeah. Or the dogs will show it, or, that was kind of the point of this podcast was it's an opportunity for people to see as we grow so that people can see we're not perfect either. And, there's other trainers out there, and this kind of serves as our little version of like our beacon to seek out like-minded people and see how we can all learn from each other.
Cool. Can we, I want to go back to rescue dogs a little bit if we can. I wanted to ask you guys a question about when working with clients, what would you say is the rescue dogs and clients, or clients who have rescue dogs? What would you say is the hardest obstacles to come through?
From the client or from the dog?
Both.
From the client, I think the only thing that can be difficult sometimes is when the client, they call and they, because sometimes maybe a client isn't always super receptive to what you're telling them when it comes to the dog. And so you'll meet with them or talk to them, or, however it is that you guys get together, and you're explaining to them like, oh, well, I can understand where you're coming from. And you think, this, based on what I'm seeing, I'm assuming it's probably more to do with like X, Y, Z. And then they're just kind of like, are you sure? Because I feel like it's because of this, It's not a super difficult thing, but that's probably one of like the harder, because other than that, I mean, maybe if the dog has like a more serious issue, then it's a little tougher, like how to socialize the dog with my other dog, But for the most part, I think the hardest stuff is typically just to do with the owner. What do you think, Corey?
Right. So I think, this is what I try to do is I reverse engineer. So when somebody calls, we just got this new rescue dog, he's 3 years old, and they say, this is our lifestyle and this is where we want to be with the dog, right? So I start with the goal and I say, okay, well, this is your goal. So now let's reverse engineer the steps that it's going to take for you to get to the goal based on where your dog is currently at.
Right.
So your dog may be here or your dog may be here and our goal is here. So I think the toughest part is trying to then break down, okay, yes, these are the steps that it's going to take for you to get there. And along with what you're saying, Mariano, about trying to tell them, explain to them, okay, these are your issues. I understand what you're saying, but that's not really the case here. I look at my point of view. So I sort of agree with that. At the same time, with my own experience, again, I think when you have enough experience under your belt, a lot of the times, and you can tell me if this is for you guys, people, your clients are being referred to you.
Yeah.
So people already know how you work. Right. I mean, and this is, again, my own experience. I rarely get brand new clients or dogs that don't know who I am.
Right.
So they kind of already know, like, all right, this is his style. This is his thought process. This is his thinking. Like, we know what to expect. Maybe after we've done training with him, we've seen the dogs that he's worked with. We know these rescues, blah, blah, blah. And so therefore they kind of fit themselves in a little bit easier. I don't have to work so hard by saying, yeah, I get that, but we need to look at it this way. Okay. That's definitely a trial, though, is you trying to not get them to think like you, but get them to understand maybe why these things are happening and then the direction that they need to go down. Right?
Yeah, it's fun. I mean, luckily, because I agree with that too. I think luckily I haven't necessarily like. It's not that it's super duper hard. It's just none of it's really like all that hard. Again, I mean, unless the dog has like a, you know, a serious issue, there's really none of it that's that hard. I mean, dog training can be a lot of things. It can be like monotonous, can be challenging, can be emotionally draining. But like on a scale of easy to hard things to do, I would just put it as like maybe one of the harder. I mean, that's still relevant to like, it's probably not that tough. You know, I think the way that I look at it is, other than a reputation, because I agree, I think having good presence, like, you know, I was surprised in LA and here in Arizona, I was surprised how many dog trainers don't have like things that I feel like they should have, like a website, you know, or maybe good social media accounts, or, you know, YouTube and podcasting. That's kind of extracurricular stuff, but at least like a decent website. And I've had a lot of people who, you know, for example, they have a dog that's got some like really serious separation anxiety. You know, they don't crate the dog because he just drools and goes nuts. And when they don't crate him, he just barks at the window and goes nuts. Right. They've tried like XYZ, and they've tried, I don't know how many different trainers, behaviorists, like medications and things like that. And they were like nervous about a certain type of training, like maybe crate training or like e-collar work or whatever the case. And I never even spoke to them until they called me, and they were like, I've always been nervous about like this, but I found your website, like I read it, and they were already on board just based on the website. You know, so the stuff like that, like you get lucky. I think that, you know, it's definitely important to put it like for maybe a younger dog trainer. It's not necessarily, the goal isn't necessarily to get the client to see things your way, because depending on what the client looks like if they're older, younger, have children or not, you know, you kind of adjust your approach and your verbiage and how to get through to them emotionally. The goal is just to get them behind the process. It's not me. Like I tell people, you know, there's nothing magical to dog training. I just do the work and just trust the work and just drive through, you know? And so once I get them willing to just get going, then momentum can build for itself.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right. And I think, go ahead, Brent. Go ahead.
Oh no, I just wanted to kind of comment a little bit on, so the issues. So the issues for you, Mariano, were more of like, you know, kind of trying to penetrate the owner's potential, you know, negative thought processes or potential beliefs to be able to kind of help them get on board to be able to help their dog. Does that kind of summarize it a little bit?
Yeah, that, or cut it off at the pass, you know, because when you get, you know, when you get more experience,
before
with it,
it gets out of control. Yeah. Before it gets out of control. And then I really liked your approach, Corey, about the reverse engineering certain things. Yeah. I think I'm going to steal that, just so you know. I'm totally stealing.
I think that's just that I work like that in everything that I do. I kind of reverse engineer, right? Because I mean, if you have a goal, then you need to figure out the steps to get to the goal. Like it's pretty simple, and then you start at the bottom. Yeah. So yes.
So one of my ideas in rescue dog training, right? I always tell people that your dog has unresolved puppy issues, right? Which means that a lot of times when dogs were growing up, right? This is a very common rescue story. And me and Corey have done many rescue seminars together for certain rescue organizations back when we were working together. But it's a very common story we see. We see a family gets a puppy. That puppy is either potty training or chew training inside the house. And at some point, someone gets overwhelmed, right? And they get overwhelmed by the dog pooping and peeing everywhere. So sometimes they just put the dog in the garage, or they put the dog outside, right? And this is an environment where the dog is left alone a majority of his childhood. And in this childhood, the dog kind of grows up doing his own thing, entertaining himself, chewing on things, destroying toys, ripping up wee-wee pads, barking at things, digging holes, all this numerous number of like what I would consider to be animalistic and childish puppy things. But then what we see is this puppy grows up, 5 months, 6 months, 7 months old. And then by the time they hit adolescence, a lot of dog owners had this idea before they surrender their dog. They go, I was hoping that my dog would grow out of this. Mm-hmm. I was hoping my dog would grow out of this. It's just puppy stuff. Well, the funny thing is the dog never grew out of it because they didn't have a human there to help guide it to grow out of these things. It wasn't there to give it any structure, right? So this dog doesn't know how to be alone, or the dog does know how to be alone, but only in a destructive way. right? This dog, when this dog does get attention, this dog wants to soak up all the attention possible. That's why it jumps on you and mouths you and grabs you and bites your clothes and does all these things, because the only time it would see a human was when someone went to the backyard to drop a food bowl, or when the kid went to go play for 5 minutes before he got chewed up and the parents told him to come back inside. Right. And so we see this a lot. And also in dog rescue, a majority of the age range that we see in dog rescue is always usually between 10 months to a year and a half. Right. And 10 months to a year and a half in dog development is pure adolescence. It's like a 13-year-old kid to a 21-year-old kid, and we see this age range. And unfortunately, this is the age where people give up on the dogs, because now you have a dog who has the body of an adult, but the brain of a puppy.
Right.
Right. And so to your point, Corey, dogs suffer from lack of patience and self-control. Right. And I just coin it a little bit different. I just say it's unresolved puppy issues. You have a giant puppy with the body of a man, but the brain of a puppy. Right. And I've been accused of being that person myself.
Sure, we all have. I mean, we're male, we're boys.
We're all kids. We're all kids. Yeah. But so it's like a part of me kind of relates to the dog. But so I see this, right? Puppy raising, right? So a lot of our goals with puppies is if we give the puppy a good childhood, we won't have to deal with any of these rescue issues. Right. And I guess rescue issues is a pretty vague term. If you guys were going to name your top 4 rescue issues, what would those rescue issues be?
Lack of socialization, separation anxiety, and protectiveness.
Cool. How about you, Corey?
I will say lack of education. Separation anxiety. And let's see. Lack of what did you say, Mariana? What did you say again?
Socialization, separation anxiety, and territory. Protectiveness, resource guarding, that sort of thing.
I won't even want to say like big one. Could be just structure. Like the dog just doesn't have any structure, right? So which could go in with education as well. But I mean, those are kind of the 3 that I think I see there. And then just to touch on what you were saying, Brent, about being big having a big body with a small brain. It's like, I think
puppy brain, a puppy, not a small brain,
puppy brain. You're right. So puppy brain. So that goes in with maybe my 3, which are going to be, the lack of education. And so, we have a 4 or 5-year-old dog that has a puppy level education. Yeah. So doesn't mean that he's a puppy, but it means he behaves like a puppy because he's missing those 3 things. Or again, might not be separation anxiety, but so I mean, maybe we might even see that as being one of the major issues, which I'm saying is a lack of education, is what I'm saying.
Right.
Yeah. I think lack of education is like such a good umbrella term. Like it covers so many.
It covers
things,
a lot.
Obedience to structure to all those, to all those things. I think if I were going to come up with the top 3 for myself, I would definitely say confidence. I think that's really important. That's one thing that we see lacking, because confidence is a byproduct of being educated, of knowing, of having structure, and most importantly, having a family dynamic that you feel safe in. I think that's the most important, right? So it kind of always made me ask the question. It's like, why do we see that dogs who weren't socialized at a young age, why do they tend to fall into these patterns where they get possessive or protective or territorial easier than, let's say, the puppy who is raised from puppyhood under a structured family with a loving family and all those things. And, you kind of, I'm not a kid expert, but like you can definitely see, we've all met people, had friends, interacted with people who may have not had the childhoods that we had. Right. And we see that it's harder for them to maybe deal with certain types of stress. It's harder for them to deal with certain types of ideas or trauma. It's hard for them to deal with, I guess, what we would consider their unresolved puppy issues, right? Like self-control, impulse control, anger issues, reactivity, all those things. And so we can kind of see on a human scale how that is related. And so confidence is a big one for me, because I think confidence is developed from having a good family, a good structure, and a great education, right?
Mm-hmm.
That education to me is what makes us not live in our primitive brain.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And to make us feel safe, that we can be outside, we can transcend that primitive brain a little bit. The other one would be, totally lack of socialization. I think that's really important, because it doesn't matter how educated the dog is. If he doesn't understand the real world, then, it's not going to work.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think the other one, just so I can try and be different, I may really try and think, see if we can help educate some people. It would be the right obedience at the right age. Right. And I think, a lot of times, and don't get me wrong, I'm going to contradict myself a little bit. One big point that I want to make is, or one of the big things that bothers me is sometimes, based on there is no standard of dog training that exists, right? There's like marketing terms like positive reinforcement or, dominance and stuff like that. There's all these different terms that people use that they don't really know what it means. I always compare dog training to like schooling, where it's like, elementary school is about fundamentals and foundation, right? And learning reading and writing, pretty much. That's what elementary school is for. Middle school is about developing work ethic. High school is about developing social skills and work ethic. College is about independence and being responsible. Right. And we see these different tiers of education through humans. And so if we kind of looked at dogs, it's like nothing bothers me more than when someone is using a puppy technique on an adolescent dog or an adult dog. Right.
But that goes back, sorry to interrupt. That goes back to that understanding of, he's still a puppy.
Yeah.
But he's 3 years old. Exactly.
And it's a development thing. Yeah. And there are people who don't understand dog development. So the point I guess I want to make is if people could raise the dog for the age that and for the age that they are, or what stage of development that they are in. And I'm constantly having to remind people of, now your dog is a teenager. Now your dog is a preteen. We should work like this. Now your dog is a puppy. We shouldn't use these methods because he's a freaking child, right? So I always have to kind of coach people through that process, so that they can understand there are different phases in the learning and education process. So that way our dogs can reap the benefits, right? And there are certain circumstances. Again, the reason I said I was going to contradict myself earlier is because when it comes to structure and routine, all of those techniques are pretty much identical to the stuff that I would do with a puppy, right?
Right.
Independence or den training, teaching the dog to live in a den, obedience, chew training, right? All the same things I would do with a puppy, I'll do with a 2-year-old, 3-year-old, 4-year-old, 5-year-old rescue dog as well. And they work like a champ. However, when it comes to obedience, when it comes to working on the dog's motivation, that's where we really have to kind of see, what's going to work for that particular dog.
Yes. So I look at that as 90% of what a dog is going to need is going to be the same dog to dog. They're all going to need 90% of the same things, right? They are.
And it's because we all live kind of similar lives. That's why.
Exactly. So, and then the 10% is going to be based off of the individual dog, right? So, you have a pug versus, you got the border collie, right? So there's where you're going to say, okay, these techniques aren't going to work and your dog is like this, and we're going to have to do that. But 90% of it is going to be the same. Sure, your dog needs, whatever type of education. It needs to know confinement. It needs to have patience and self-control. It needs to be socialized. All of those things are all going to be applied to every single dog.
Right.
So yes, I think I agree with you on that. And go ahead.
I think that what you said earlier, I do like, that it's like, I liked it when I heard it, but it just had more time to kind of sink into my brain about like reverse engineering stuff. I think that's something that really can make somebody a much better dog trainer. Like if somebody's listening to this, when you start reverse engineering things, because it doesn't just work for goals, it does, but it not only, it also works for, like when we're talking about how to understand where a client might be coming from. And, we talked earlier about like, the better you get with people, the more you kind of open your basis to what kind of different clients you can work with and really empathize with and like connect with. A lot of that I think stems from, I get what you're saying now, which means if I kind of reverse engineer it, it probably started as this at one point. And the same thing kind of goes for dogs. Like I really like working with dogs with a little bit more like behavioral issue. I've always found that fun and interesting, and I've always found working with the type of client that tends to have that type of dog really interesting. And I think that when we're reverse engineering certain things, like, is the dog protective? Do they stuff themselves in the crate with a bone and you try to call them out and they growl, even though when they're not in the crate, they don't. And like, there's these things that can confuse people. And it's so much fun to like, you sit and you think about what the dog is currently doing. What is this issue? And then you start to, kind of like a person, you empathize with the dog, but just like the person, it's to a degree, because I get where you're coming from, but that doesn't mean that it's appropriate. Right. Mm-hmm. So you kind of find out where the dog is and what they're thinking in that moment. And then you build that connection of like, oh, the dog does this and the human probably thinks it's this. And then from there, it's like, okay, I'm going to reverse engineer you both and find that like middle ground so that we can start pushing you both in a new direction. I've always found that to be a real cool thing.
Yeah, that's the sport of it, I think.
Right.
In dog training, that's the sport. That's the fun. That's the part where you're like, you never know what you're going to get in front of you. And there are some clients that are just like, oh my God, it was so great. I gave them the level 1 spiel and they loved it, And there are some people that like really test your skills. There are some people who they really put your skills up to the test and your knowledge up to the test. And, those are the people where I'm happy to go out of my way to learn something. So I'll go out of my way to test something, to either, prove my point or disprove my point. We're like, oh yeah, that doesn't work. We're going to try it this way. And as long as you have this determination of like no quit in you, you're going to find the answer. You're going to find the solution. And so, I really like that.
It's problem solving. That's what we do.
Yeah.
On both ends and in multiple angles, all you're doing is problem solving.
Yeah.
And so obviously it becomes a little bit easier when you've solved a lot of problems.
Yeah.
Right.
Sure.
Over time, you're going to and then that's how you can reverse engineer, because you've said, well, I've seen all of these problems and I've been successful through all of these problems. So where does your dog fit in the problems? Right. And I have my process of, okay, somebody tells me over the phone, this is my dog, this is where I'm trying to be. So I'm going to say, if I ran that dog through my process, how long is it going to take? And that's the reverse engineering. So when I'm saying reverse engineering, is because I'm running the dog through my process mentally, right? Because of the experience and all of the problem solving. And so, yes, this is a very mentally exhausting profession.
Yeah.
You leave your session that client challenged you with, and you're like, shit.
Yeah, I've been there.
2 hours you've been talking, and that's something that, yes, you have to build up some mental toughness for that, because your job is, think about this, your job is, somebody's paying you to go into their home. They're expecting you to have an answer for everything they ask you, and they want results. Right. And so, think of that. You have to show up. You have to say, okay, yes, I'm confident. I have experience. I have all of this under my belt, and I have to have an answer for all of this. And you will get there. You will get there if you put the work in and solving all of these problems over here. To have that confidence, as you said, confidence is education, comes from education, right? So the more that you've got, more that you know, and the more that you've done will bring that confidence. And then now you can go into that session, and it's still going to mentally drain you though. Yeah, it's still going to, because they rapid fire, right?
Oh yeah,
they're okay. We're doing this. But what about this? And what about this? And so you're going to have to maintain and control that conversation and the session, and it's going to be very mentally challenging for you. And it's so insane how I could be dead tired going into a session, and I leave, and I've got so much energy.
Yeah.
That was amazing. We connected, we made progress. They're super happy. The dog is doing better, and you scheduled another session.
And you're just like, who got it?
So it's very,
like you're up for the challenge. You're like,
exactly.
I love this so much. I can't wait to see how I can help this next dog or this next client or this next.
And that was what you said. Right. And that was what you said about, that was the part that you liked was figuring those things out where that person really challenges you and you had to learn new techniques to implement it. Yeah. You like those people that challenge you just as much as you like the ones where you came in and you gave them the level 1 and they were happy.
Yeah.
That's what you were there for. True. One of them just challenged you more than the other. Right. And so at this point, when you become, Brent Labrada and you're great, then not everybody's going to challenge you.
True.
Right. So when
True.
you come across that one that challenges you, you're like, oh, and those people that you sort of connect with there mentally, and you can see them, you're like, oh, you get this. Or those people that you talk to where you're like, whoa. And I'm open about this. I tell them when I'm talking to them on the phone, I'm like, the fact that you and I are speaking this way to each other and having this conversation tells me you're ahead of the game.
Yeah, you're ahead
because
of it.
I just talked to 20 people before you where I had to start from the beginning and explain to them, whoa, we're way down here and your dog's here and you're not there yet, right? But those other people that maybe are at another level of their understanding of where they're at with their dog, it's just a different connection.
Right.
It's a different connection. That's all.
Right.
Yeah, I think that those are all really good points, and what I really like about what we've been talking about so far, and it's really refreshing to get, Corey's perspective on the whole thing, is there is a certain like kind of finesse to dog training. And the funny thing is, like, the simple kind of rudimentary stuff, you learn easy. Like, you learn how to work food with a dog, and, you can learn that in like a 5-hour YouTube stint, but I think where you find experience is just really handy is, other than the client, is just the small kind of minutia, the things that, like, they're the same, but they're very, hardly different, but they can sometimes make a world of a difference. Like, oh, this dog doesn't like this treat, let's try another one. Or, things that for some reason when you're like newer, they just don't occur to you. But once you hear it, you're like, oh, duh.
Right.
I want to ask you guys this, though. When it comes to rescue dogs, just because of where we are right now with this whole thing, and I've personally been seeing a lot of, I have a foster dog right now. I work with a couple different rescues, and I foster like some more kind of troublesome dogs, and I train them as I have them, and then we send them out. I've been getting lots of like emails, and I've been attached to a lot of email chains between other people about like, this one had a shutdown, that one had a shutdown. We're trying to place this dog, and rescue people always have like, 5 dog minimum, it seems like. So when an owner or a younger trainer or somebody who's looking to help out by taking in dogs into the home, even if it's just temporary, like a foster situation till this whole thing blows over, if they've already got dogs or like roommates or whatever the case, what do you guys think would be good in terms of how to help people navigate that? Like, is it a good crate training schedule? Is it a good, like, just overall routine from potty breaks to walks at this time to training at that time? Just some stuff that I think people could really benefit from on that front.
I would say keep it simple. I think that's the big thing. I think to what Corey alluded to earlier, people want to do too much with their dogs too soon when they get it. And this ends up kind of becoming the pitfall for a lot of dog owners. So what I learned from one of my mentors was pretty much dogs go through post-adoptive stress, right? They're in a new place. They're in a new environment. They are, they don't know you. They don't know your roommates. They don't know anything that's going on. And unfortunately, what happens is if we keep, the absence of bad behavior doesn't necessarily mean that the dog enjoys what's going on. Right. So just because the dog's not growling or tucking his tail underneath doesn't mean that the dog's not going through stress. And so, and this is across the board, and this is something we can generally say for all dogs, right? It doesn't matter how happy your dog is and how much he's wagging his tail. Your dog is receiving stress, just some dogs handle it differently, right? And so a lot of times what happens is we have this scarcity mentality where we think that the dogs didn't get enough this or enough playtime or enough food or enough toys. And so unfortunately what this does, it leads us to give the dog too much excess. And I heard this analogy when I was a younger dog trainer. It was kind of like, what happens if you give a person who's been homeless for many years millions of dollars, right? And so everyone thinks like, oh, they were just going to buy everything. The idea is no, because they've been conditioned to live a certain way, right? They won't know how to spend that millions of dollars because they're just like, what the hell do I do with this? Right? Because they're not used to, they don't have those expectations developed in their mind. And so with our dogs, it's giving them too much up front sometimes is in vain. And sometimes it's detrimental. So my advice would be keep it really simple for the first couple weeks, right? Teach them everything that you would teach a puppy, potty training, how to sleep all the way through the night, how to eat all their food when you want them to, how to be alone on occasion when you're home. And then teach them, what is acceptable behavior when you're off leash in my house or my apartment, right? So, some dogs will chew on your couch. Some dogs will bark. Some dogs will mark. Some dogs will do all these things. And so I always kind of give people 5 tips. Make sure your dog's potty trained. Make sure your dog is eating well. Make sure your dog can sleep all the way through the night. Make sure that your dog can be alone from you for short periods of time. And then, correct any or start guiding the dog through any bad behaviors that he might have when he's free in your house. Right. And I didn't write these things up. These are things that I found through research, but I really like these 5 things as good quantifiable goals for any person who just rescued a dog for the first time.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I agree with those. I think because the issues that I get calls for the most with people who got a new rescue dog are accidents, potty training, biting, and separation anxiety. Mm-hmm. And so I think I agree with you too much too quickly, right? Mm-hmm. So you bring this new dog into your home and it has no understanding of what it's supposed to do, who its family is, and so we, with no strong you don't have a relationship with the dog yet. So we bring it into this new environment and then give it a lot of freedom too quickly, and now it's just it's either going to make a bunch of mistakes. Mm-hmm. Or it's just not going to do anything, right? Because how many times have somebody's called and said, we got a rescue dog, 4 months ago, and for 2 months we didn't hear him bark. He didn't bark a single time, right? And then all of a sudden after 3 months, like he won't shut up.
Yeah.
He's barking all the time. Yeah. And so a lot of it is either too much too quickly or too much too. It's not either or. It's actually just too much too quickly. So I think going with what you said on those 5 points is that's just part of crate training and using your crate.
Yeah,
in the
that's
beginning.
Part of routine.
Confinement. So it doesn't need to be a crate, but some type of confinement, which allows the dog to just experience the home that it's in without having to be in the middle of it. Yeah. Right. Because once the dog's in the middle of it, without any training, any education, or without your relationship being strong enough where you could actually guide it through these situations, it's just going to be making a bunch of mistakes.
Right.
And so, this is where the kids get bit.
Right.
And that I get calls like that just yesterday. Oh yeah, it's biting the kids. And I said, well, it's not really biting the kids because it's just a puppy. It's more mouthing. But if we use our crate a little bit more, our confinement, and we use and maybe don't give so much freedom. But I'm also Brent, you know me, I'm a straight shooter. So I have a way of talking to client where I'm like, but
your kid shouldn't be on the dog. Yeah.
I said that. Well, I said if it were my puppy, my 2-year-old would not be left with the puppy.
Yeah, no.
That's the nature of the situation.
This isn't a Disney movie.
Right. You put your dog in the situation. And also remember, you chose this situation because you got a puppy.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's kind of a sad thing about dogs is that people have the tools that they need, at least these days, to kind of build on themselves if they want to. Dogs largely are they're limited to the extent that the owners are willing to push them to. And that's not such a bad thing when we have good owners that are willing to train their dogs and really give them what they need. But a lot of times you find backyard dogs or, and so that's just something that I've noticed too. That's just kind of sad. And I think, you're totally right that what we said earlier was the dog is under stress. I mean, how could you not be? Moving is stressful even for people. It's one of the most stressful things you can do, according to people who study, human kind of ideals and their value systems. And it's they say moving is not far away in terms of stress than losing a loved one. It sucks.
Wow. Yeah.
You're in a new place, new people. And for a dog, you multiply that by we don't even speak the same language to an extent. And, I think the whole thing about how how training dogs can be mentally draining and you can really wear yourself out. Being that dog can be mentally draining too. And you can kind of see when the dog's in the mood and kind of willing to engage, and you can see when they're not. And that's, I think, where routine really helps out a lot. And so it's good to understand, if you have a new dog and you have a 2-year-old, and kids are just naturally just annoying to dogs. They just have that gift to like really bother dogs.
Gift.
They do. I mean, because they're young, and nobody blames them, but it is what it is, right? Because I'm kind of a straight shooter too when it comes to clients. I'm like, look, man, I mean, he's 2. Like, what do you really keep them away from each other except for when you're around? And at that point, you basically have to teach them both how to behave around each other because they're both going to be around. So a lot of it stems from like you said, a good routine means not only crate training, not only potty training and meal, like trying to get a good food schedule going, but also when it's appropriate to play, when you can be loose in the house, and when you're not necessarily like put away, but you don't necessarily need to be free roaming either. Like you put your dog in a downstay, put him in a place command and let them hang out. It's okay for them to learn how to be part of what's going on, but not at like the epicenter of it and really trying to like drive everything. It's okay to just like sit back and observe. And when they're done with it, when they're tired, because I know you guys have seen it, like what a tired, worn out dog looks like mentally speaking. That's when it's beneficial to put them away, because when you don't, that's when stuff tends to happen. Dog's already like over it. 2-year-old steps on his head one more time, and then it's like, and then there's an issue. So it's definitely beneficial to have that good routine so that everybody understands that we all have jobs to do. You got the dog, it's your kid, it's your dog. We expect the dog really relies on you to do certain things for them, and teach them and kind of help them out. Same thing with your kids, maybe don't put them around a brand new dog because it's just not the smartest thing to do. There are ways to introduce them. There are ways to teach the kids to be respectful. But yeah, I couldn't agree more.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Now, one of the things that I run into a lot is an aversion to confinement. What are your guys' thoughts on this?
Happens all the time.
Yeah.
I mean, it's probably the 8 out of 10 people that I talk to is going to be something like that, right?
And why do you think people have an aversion to confinement?
They think it's mean.
Yeah.
They don't understand it, right? It's just a lack of education, lack of knowledge. They don't understand. So they think it's mean. And especially if, again, we're talking about rescue dog, the last thing they want to do is lock the dog up.
Right. I hear that exact verbiage. So, I don't want to put him in jail. I don't want him to think he did something wrong.
Right. Exactly. That's always, we want to make sure it's not a punishment, right?
Right.
It's the same things we've heard for years. And the same understandings that are floating around. So I think it's just because, they want the dog to be free because they just rescued them. And so the last thing they want to do is confine them.
Right.
Mm-hmm. How do you guys go about explaining that to clients? If you were to, okay, I have an aversion. I'm, client A, and I have an aversion to putting my dog because I think it's mean. How do you guys go about, helping them understand or what your points are?
I say it's natural, right? I mean, which it is. Dogs are denning animals. It's natural for them to, like confined space, one way in, one way out, tight space. This is my exact explanation. When dog gets scared, they're going to go under something, the couch, the table, the chair, the desk, they're going to hide. So it's natural for them to like tight confinement. And also then, okay, now we need to talk about, so if it's natural for them, this is a place where they would sleep, eat their food, take their naps. They would go there to hang out. And then I bring in, it's basically your dog's room. I mean, right, this is your dog's room. So if you start to now bring it in towards teaching them like, oh, this is kind of like a child, right? Child has their room. And one of the funny things I say is that, I just thought about this not too long ago, but where people will say, well, we don't want it to be a punishment. And I say, well, kids get sent to their room all the time.
Yep.
Do they avoid their room after you've sent them to their room? Like, no, they don't. Yep. They go back to their room, all the time. So, and everyone's like, oh yeah, you're right. Yeah, you're right. Yeah. So sure. I mean, even if you did use the crate as a punishment, I don't think that the dog is going to avoid it the next time.
Yeah.
It might. It has to, it really going to depend on what the punishment was. But if your dog understands the crate and you got upset because it did something and you needed to put it away really quickly, I don't think it's going to avoid it next time. Yeah,
I think it stems from, there's a really, in my opinion, I think there's a pretty clear explanation as to why that is, like why kids can be sent to their room or why we even send kids to their rooms and why they don't mind it after the fact. Because number one, you're totally right. And I use that too. Like, dogs love crates. So canines in general are den animals and they feel comfortable in the crate. If a dog is, and like most of the time, maybe you guys will agree with me, like people always say, if I put him in there, close the door, like he whines or whatever he does, digs, bends his way out. But like, it's weird because when I'm home, he just goes in there, so it's the whole thing of like, it's not necessarily that the dog dislikes the crate. It's just maybe the dog has an issue with being away from you for the time being, which could be a separate issue, because that could be crate or not. Because a lot of times,
what I tell my clients is kind of to your analogy, Corey. I always say, like, think of our bedrooms as kids. I would eat food in my bedroom. I'd play with my toys in my bedroom. If I wanted to be left alone, I'd go to my bedroom. If I wanted to sleep, I'd go to my bedroom. The only time that I hated going to my bedroom was when I was sent there against my will.
Right. There's a reason why. I think, though, that like when I talk to clients who have a hard time crate training their dogs, what I tell them is, here's the thing, and this is why we do it with kids. This is why there's like minimum ages for things in just normal society too, is because obviously the goal of any person who rescues a dog, much like a person who raises kids, is you want them to be like fully functioning, fully free kind of members of the house or society, or, or whatever their role is going to be. But the thing about a crate is there's an inverse to them liking the safety of it. Is there can be problems that arise from too much freedom, because the dog doesn't quite know what to do with themselves, and they just start doing things they shouldn't do, which steamroll into bad habits, which over time become what the dog is overall, because we're just kind of a summation of like of all of our habits put together. So what I tell people is, of course, you want to maximize your dog's freedom, but it's our jobs to give them as much freedom as they can effectively handle. And that changes over time. As the dog gets better, they can have more freedoms. But for the time being, I'm not going to do something to them that's detrimental. And I understand where you're coming from, but it's really good to just kind of keep in mind that it's our job to see the dog where he is now. That doesn't mean he'll be this way forever, but for the time being, maybe, crate train him and do this and do that. And when he's better, we can talk about more access to stuff later when he can handle it.
Right. 100%. Right. I totally.
Well, and I think handling it is predicated on how much work do you put in.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly.
The dog's he's not going to get better by himself. And so, that goes back to earlier we were talking about, he's going to outgrow that. No, he's not going to outgrow that.
Right.
It's going to probably get worse, or it'll turn into something else. And so, it's going to be, all this is predicated on how much work you put into it. Right.
Right.
So I agree.
It's kind of like the kid thing, it's kind of like, the kids don't just learn how, that's what schooling is for, right? You teach them how to handle things, and then that's how they get better. So absolutely. Same thing with dogs. I would even argue it's more so with dogs, because kids, at least, like, we're all the same species. We speak the same language. Like, they can learn things kind of by proxy, whether they like necessarily go to school for it or not. A dog is largely stuck. And it's amazing how people who have like an older dog, let's say I've had clients that like adopted the dog as a puppy, like 4 or 5 months old. And then they call you when the dog's like 7 years old and has like a good bite history to them. And things have gone way wrong, like a long time ago. And what ends up happening is I'll meet with the people and kind of see them interact, and, and I'm like, man, it's like amazing how little the dog and the owners really know how to communicate with each other after like 6.5 years of being together. And it's because if you've never, the wonderful thing about obedience is it serves as a means of communication. Once I know how to ask something of a dog, and my dog knows exactly what I want, and he also understands if you do it, there's rewards in it for you and stuff like that. We're no longer just kind of like roommates that live together. We're like actual family that depend on each other. We're like a team now. And, and it's amazing how often that gets overlooked, even when people have had dogs for a while.
Yeah. I mean, it's for sure. I think, that's relationship development.
Right.
So yeah. And I think we have to explain that a lot of the times, because again, that comes down to people doing things too quickly. They're not ready for it. They themselves are not ready for it. And the relationship that they have with the dog is not ready for that. And I'm working with somebody right now where, they're going to return the dog. And it's just because the relationship isn't strong enough yet for her to try to work on the issues. And then she try to do it too quickly. So
to try to force the relationship. Versus meeting the dog where it was.
Right. So now we're kind of stuck at ground zero again, but that's just all about, you're making sure that your relationship is strong enough for you to be able to guide that and guide the dog through those situations when they're ready for it.
Right.
When they're ready for it. And that comes down to our education, right? Because again, us educating
the client,
the owner, hey, you're not ready for that just yet. And, work on these things. And
Right. So what advice do you guys have given this COVID-19 lockdown? And you kind of asked something similar to this, Mariano, as well. But like, what advice could we give clients, trainers who are listening to this people who are just fostering for short periods of times, or volunteers who are actually, or people who are actually adopting dogs. How can we prevent these dogs from separation anxiety, from overprotection, from codependency, from these things that we predict might happen when we all go back to our normal lives?
So I approach it from the perspective of the dog that's being placed. So what I tell people is, it's not necessarily the goal of a rescue to like place dogs, quickly or however they can. It's our goal to place dogs to the best of our knowledge in a home that's going to be like long-term viable, because it's sucks every time the dog gets returned for whatever reason, and then you have like dogs that are just kind of rotating dogs that are always in and out, and each and every one of those circumstances just is another like example for the dog. And I would rather spare them if I could, not to mention people, depending on what happens in the household, of course. But my advice to people would be realistic up front. I'm glad, like if we're talking fostering or adopting, actually, I'm glad that you're a caring person who wants to help these dogs, either if it's for temporary or for the lifetime of the dog. But make sure that this is something you're
talking about, yeah? Or
well, both,
okay.
Like fosters or adopting,
Got it. Okay, sorry.
Either way, I think even if you're just fostering, but obviously, of course, if you're adopting, make sure that the dog fits with your lifestyle. And obviously that's a net that gets a little wider cast when you do the appropriate training, but just to an extent. I just met with someone the other day, because they were considering the dog that I'm fostering, and it was like it's a pit bull Catahoula, high energy, super working driven dog, very sweet, but like very no nonsense. And this girl was like a college kid, lives in a dorm, and I'm like, no, like,
cut it.
Yeah, and I'm like, it just, and they have another dog and stuff like that, and I'm like, I just be realistic about what you've got and understand that the poor dog, just like you and everything else, their comfort, and they're like, why put them through the stress if this ain't going to work out in the first place. But once you do take on the dog, and just as a quick little tip for anybody listening who's like in the LA area, Corey or Brent, I've seen both of you guys do this thing to where, like, if somebody's not sure about what kind of dog, then call either one of these guys up, and I'm sure that you guys can talk about what the household looks like and what's going on, and then maybe they can meet with you or meet with the other dog and kind of decide if it's a good fit. That's always a smart thing to do. But once you get the dog, then I would say stick to the process because it works. Build a routine, crate training, food training, potty training, start building your obedience, then start socializing when the dog can bear it. Because I agree with you guys that, like, the relationship, it's kind of like credit. You build it, then you can kind of cash in on it, but not before it's time. And, and the longer you've been doing it, the more you've got to kind of cash in on and stuff like that. And you can, there can be kind of withdrawals from it if you do something wrong, or, then you have to take a step backwards and kind of meet the dog where they are.
Trust. You end up losing trust.
Right. And you got to make up all this ground this time, and so it's like, take things slow. I couldn't agree more with that. Build a routine. Couldn't agree more with that. But also just be realistic from the jump. Everybody depends on it.
Right.
Yeah, I think, right now, a lot of my explanations are, I'm preparing for a lot of dogs with a lot of separation anxiety once we're done with this.
Right.
Because we're spending all of this time with them inside the home. We're not having them be by themselves or separated. That's just the biggest one, right? Separation. Right. And not only the separation, but what are you doing with your dog when you're with them? When they're out of their confinement. And that's, and I'm explaining that because that's the way we work in our board and train program. Yeah. We're taking advantage of every opportunity we spend with the dog to teach something, to reinforce something. So that's what I'm trying to teach right now. Hey, when you're with your dog and, we're talking about the structure or your routine, keep up with that right now, because when you go back to work in a month, 2 months, whatever it may be, your dog's going to say, well, what the heck? I've been with you, for 2 months straight, just sitting on the couch. And then now you're going to leave me for 8 hours. Right. Yeah. So we have to, foresee that happening. And so we need to get the dog caught up to speed and educate them and get them on the routine for that future. And so a lot of that is just, again, education. Hey, look, I recommend we're going to do this for that reason. And people are going to say, and a lot of times they only want to put the dog in the crate when they've been bad, right? And so we have to educate them, and we have to say, but it's because of this reason. We want to work on the separation. We want to build confidence away from you. So that's the biggest one that I'm focusing on right now, is with these people, people who have gotten a foster dog, whether it be older or whether it be puppy, because now they're working on their potty training. And So I think, the crate training, and then trying to do as much as obedience as you can.
Yeah.
You know, right now while you're inside, I mean, you're stuck inside with your dog. So let's be working on some obedience. Or even, like Brett's brain games video the other day, your live that you did. Yeah. Things like that. Like, do those things with your dog, tire them out, and then, confine them. So that's what I'm focusing on the most right now, which I think is kind of what we focus on anyways when somebody gets a brand new dog, because we're talking about, hey, don't do things too quickly. Don't give too much freedom too quickly.
Don't oversaturate.
Don't oversaturate. Right. So what do I want to say? Everyone I'm talking to, that's the conversation that we're having.
Yeah. No, I love that. I think all that advice is super helpful for people. Here's one of the things, guys. This is a preventative measure. It's kind of like, we are trying to prevent separation anxiety, because the reality of it is separation anxiety, isolation distress, all these different, things that are emotional distress to our dogs. They happen on different levels. And one interesting thing that I learned, just over understanding biology and understanding human psychology and animal psychology, was that dogs can literally get chemically addicted to us, right? They can get chemically addicted to always being pet or always getting attention from us. And what happens is dogs, like a drug, like when we are not there anymore, they will literally go through withdrawal symptoms from us, right? And this anxiety, even though we might think it might be as simple as like 1 or 2 days of getting the dog to adjust in it, when dogs get really, really attached or really, really, involved in a relationship with a person, unfortunately, that break or that separation is not so easy. And so many times, I'm saying this because I care about dogs, and I'm not trying to shoot ourselves in the foot as dog trainers, guys. One of the only ways to successfully deal with separation anxiety on a very severe scale, right? If it is severe separation, is actually having to send your dog away to training, right? Mm-hmm. The dog actually has to be rehabilitated now. And so what I'm trying to tell you guys, what we're trying to tell you guys, is there's so much that you can do now in the present moment to save you guys thousands and thousands of dollars of having to send your dog to board and train, right? Because at that point, when the dog gets addicted to you on a chemical level, on a biochemical level, now the dog actually has to be rehabilitated the same way an alcoholic has to be rehabilitated from his chemical addiction, right? And so we want to just let you guys know, this is these tips. I'm going to wrap up this podcast for now. Is there anything else you guys want to say in regards to rescues, how we could help people during this COVID-19 shutdown?
No, I would say just trust the process. It works. Do your routine, do your obedience, socialize your pups.
I love it. All right. I want to thank you so much, Corey. Hey, Corey, can you let people know how they can get in contact with you? Email, Instagram, Facebook. Tell them what you got.
Yeah, it's all going to be at Corcha Balanced Canine. That's CORCHA, and then the word balanced, BALNCED, and then the letter K, the number 9. That's for my Instagram, and then my website. You can find it there, and you can email me through there, but you can find me on Instagram.
We'll put all those titles at the bottom of the screen so you guys can go ahead and reach out to Corey. He's local here in Los Angeles. Any rescue organizations that you want to give a shout out to that you work with?
I work with Wags and Walks here in LA. I also work with Love at First Mutt. Yes, Love at First Mutt.
Love at First Mutt. I love that.
Yes, which they're a new one that I've been kind of working with and trying to help out some of their dogs. And Love Leo. I also work with Love Leo Rescue here as well.
Cool.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, shout out to those rescues. If you guys, we'll go ahead and put their websites on here as well. If you guys are looking for any dogs, go ahead and check out those links. You can check them out. I want to thank you guys so much for coming and joining us for episode 10. Corey, thank you so much for joining us from Corcha Balanced Canine. Mariano from Untamed Dog Training. We will see you guys next round. Thank you guys so much for sticking with us, and we'll see you guys next time. Thank you for listening to the Dog Trainers Podcast, a podcast created by dog trainers for dog trainers, or anyone who's ever fallen in love with man's best friend.
We'll see you next time.